So we're going to show an evaluation of the rib, which could also be used at a later date as a quite a very good evaluation for the actual liver.
I think this would actually, if I can interrupt,
Yeah.
on for Rebecca and Paula,
Mm-hmm.
on Rachel, who you doing your case study on the lady who was at the car crash. I think this would be a good one for you to evaluate on her, because we were looking, because she's at her shoulder.
Yeah.
Her liver's going to be involved.
Yeah. It's virtually impossible to decelerate in a car with heavy braking, which would be enough to maybe induce a whiplash, and not have the diaphragm sitting here with the liver underneath, but the seatbelt is across here. So a lot of things happen with seatbelt restraint. When you stop at, say, 60 miles an hour, you decelerate to 0, the whole body liquefacts. And it's like getting a bucket of water and throwing it against the wall. So for that instant in time, that's why even a dog in the rear of a car or a small child can actually propel forward and break your neck, because they weigh about 2.5 tons as liquefaction and with inertia thrust. So you've got to look at that ribcage restraint coming off the seatbelt. Now the liver sits under the diaphragm here. It has a ligament called the falciform ligament, which sort of goes across it diagonally like that. And the biggest lobe of the liver is down here. And so it's very easy with that seatbelt restraint for the liver to roll forward, which puts a strain on the diaphragm coronal ligament right across the top. And it also puts a strain on the falciform ligament and revolves the liver down into this new position. Now, in that position, it's not going to move the movement of the organs around their own orbit. So you've got the lungs expanding here laterally in 1 dimension, but inside expanding 3-dimensionally. So if you understand, the lung in and of itself is getting bigger, but also in and of itself is externally rotating to allow more room for the pericardium. So the heart starts to beat, and you've got the cardiorespiratory rhythm all working as one. The liver is moving out of the way of that, so it's rolling down obliquely, so that the lungs can also descend down in that 3-dimensionality, as well as out and as well as lateral. So that's the movement of the respiratory. Now, if you go inside of that, those organs have to revolve around that orbit, and that's called tergor. So if you disturb the tergor of the organs, then the rest can't move. So the seatbelt restraint is a very, very big restrictor of the liver, a really big restrictor. So once it's dropped off its fulcrum down here, it can't open up. So you could get shortness of breath, you could get asthma type symptoms, but any upper respiratory type of difficulty, which if you're not clearing your lungs out, lowers the immune system. So then you walk into a bus queue and you catch the flu or something of that nature, because you're not getting enough oxygen into your system. So we need to be able to mobilize the whole of that rib cage 3-dimensionally. So what I'm going to demonstrate is a technique that also, as I say, you can evaluate the liver from, where we're going to go under the rib cage. So I'm going to come under the rib cage at the anterior aspect here. I'm coming from the clavicle halfway along to what we call the mid-clavicular line, the mid-clavicular nipple line. The mid-clavicular nipple line continues down to the 10th rib, and that actually becomes the fulcrum of the bottom of the liver. So when we've got to the costal cartilage here, and we sat behind the client, and my fingers are on his rib cage or her rib cage, I then want them to slump forward so that my fingers sink underneath the liver. Now, as they sink underneath the liver and the stomach, I can now start to evaluate some of the tergor of those organs. So I can move the hands laterally to the left and see if it all follows me. I can then come back to the midline. With each of these evaluations, it's important to come back to the midline. I can go to the right and see if it moves to the right, back to the midline. I can then lift it and then let it drop slowly and evaluate both. So when I'm lifting, I'm seeing if the liver can lift off the colon, the transverse colon, and the kidney, because they're both making an impression underneath. When I'm dropping it back down, I'm seeing that it can separate from the lungs. So I could have inflammation from the bottom of the lung concavity to the top of the liver's convexity, and that could be inflamed. So I want to know if it drops down. I want to know if it moves in all of those directions. So the person slumps, I move them this way, I move them that way. Now, what you're going to do at the level you're at is, if you've got a restriction, say I'm moving it to the left and it doesn't want to go, then I'm going to hold that position and have you slowly turn to the right. And the same on the other side, if it doesn't move, I'm going to have you slowly turn to the left. And that starts to free some of those restrictions off. Not as specifically as it could be, but that's generically, that's going to start to free that rib cage off for you. Then we need to look at the whole flexibility of the rib cage. And so we've got the client on the couch, and it has to be able to move, as I say, in 3 dimensions. So my evaluation, if I could go into a person's sternum, is to compress the sternum either with a straight hand or a thumb and a reinforced hand, and compress down. And what I'm feeling for is the flexibility in the rib cage in more than 1 dimension. So I want to be able to go up and down, but I also want that load to spread. And that's the way the body works tensegrally. So it's going to be evenly distributed through the rib cage, as is the norm. So each of those ribs are moving as a whole, and any one of those ribs in restriction can stop the whole of that mechanism moving in that 3 dimensions. So that's really, really important after a car crash or any whiplash type situation, because what's going to happen is if your liver has restrictions, that can give rise to a lot of right arm problems. So I've seen situations where a person can't raise the right arm, say past here, and just by compressing the rib cage, which is freeing the liver off temporarily by inhibition, then the arm goes all the way up. And so you realize you haven't got a shoulder problem at all. You've got a thorax, liver, diaphragm type problem that's pulling down and not allowing the arm to go to its full abduction. So that's really important to consider with shoulder problems as well as coming in from those other roads. So I think I'll put Paul on the couch and show you that evaluation.
Is it settling down, Nick? I've just seen your message. I can see you keep going on and off.
On and off?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's a Zoom or
our
end or his end.
Yeah, it seems to have come back on now. But yeah, it just kept kicking me off. So
I know, I could see you kept going off. See, we've had mad problems with this over the last couple of days, so I don't know which end it is. We'll just keep bearing with us on it. If you go off, remember we're going to get you the recording to you.
Yeah. I'll have to watch it back because I missed a chunk of the beginning. But
okay, Don.
Yeah, I'll watch it again. All right, thanks.
Okay. Right, Paul sits facing me on the couch here. Okay. So I'm assessing some shoulder motion. So I'm going to take his arm and passively take the arm up, and I'm feeling for any glitches as I slowly take the arm through its full ascendancy. And there's no glitches there at all. So you've got full abduction. So therefore the scapulothoracic joint is working properly. The glenohumeral joint is working properly. The collarbone, the clavicle is working properly. The subclavius pulling it down and rotating it superiorly. So at this point, we can check all of those different motions. Now, if we got it to here and it didn't want to move, what I was saying earlier is that the glenohumeral joint is finished at 90 degrees. So now I'm looking for scapulohumeral rhythm. So I can go to the bottom of the scapula. Show it on here on the model. So I'm going to this pointed part of the scapula here with my fingers, and I'm going to the front of the joint with my other hand, and I'm seeing if the scapula can glide over the thoracic rib cage. And if it's really tight, some of that tightness is going to be in the rhomboid, which is of course attaches to the medial board of the scapula. Some of that tightness could be the supraspinatus in the supraspinatus groove here. It could be the teres minor or the teres major. So I'm feeling and palpating for those muscles. So as I'm working with those horizontally placed muscles, if they're dehydrated, they're going to feel fibrous and stringy and usually really quite tender because they're quite a flat muscle. So you palpate that and the person's not going to feel comfortable with that. So I know I need to work those. Then I want to know about the elbow. Can it go through its range of motion for the teres minor test? I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to drop it down a little bit to the side and check the levator scapula, pulling away from. I can also check the rhomboids from that position, but I'd rather reinforce the other one because it can sometimes cheat. If the person was stood up, I can test the latissimus dorsi. I can then assess the biceps. I can assess the triceps. I can assess the coracobrachialis. I can attest the anterior deltoid, the supraspinatus, the deltoid itself, the subscapularis, and the infraspinatus. I can also assess the upper trapezius and the levator scapula as well. So that's given me a three-dimensional picture of all of that. Then I'm coming into here, and I'm feeling for the bottom of the sternum. My fingers are spreading along the rib cage here on one side, and spreading along the rib cage this side, until I get to the bottom of the rib cage, which is rib 10. So that's, you've got the 7 true ribs, the 3 false ribs, the 2 floating ribs at the back, so on the bottom of rib 10 on either side. Then I'm having him slump slightly over there, which allows my fingers to go much further into the viscera. So at this point, I can actually slide the liver to one side, and you can see it actually moves, and we come back to midline, and we slide the liver to the other side, and it's a little draggy here. It's a little draggy, so it's not moving to the right as easy as I want it to. I'm lifting it up, and it lifts quite easily.
Can you just, you're not using anything in them fingers, Dave, are you?
No, nothing in the fingers. Yeah, it's simply I'm turning my body and making like literally a lateral shear. So I'm shearing this way, I'm shearing this way, I'm lifting and then dropping, and basically also feeling, can I get my fingers under the rib cage all the way around the rib there?